Okay, perfect. Awesome. So welcome everyone. I see a few people trickling in. Welcome to our webinar today. Happy Thursday. We'll just get started in a few minutes. Hi everyone, welcome. Welcome to our webinar today. Thank you so much for joining us on a Thursday. Where I am here in Toronto, it's rainy and pretty gloomy. Hopefully it's a little bit better where everyone else is joining from. No, Kate's shaking her head. Yeah, Adam, all right. Well, just a gloomy day overall, but thank you for making some time today to join us. We'll just get started in a minute.
I see that John was an attendee, so I've just tried to promote him to a panelist.
Perfect. Yeah, we just had a little bit of technical difficulties this morning. There we go. There we go. See, teamwork makes the dream work. Here we go. We got John. We got John here, which is fantastic. Hi, John.
Hey.
One of our lovely panelists. Okay, perfect. See, this is also an example of, yet again, we've been in Zoom for a while. There's always going to be technical difficulties. So we can sort them out. No problem. Okay, awesome. So we're just a few minutes over. I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So yet again, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Hannah Kaploon, pronounced she and her, and I'm the project coordinator at PLEAC. I'm located here in Toronto, Ontario, and I'd like to acknowledge the land I and others joining us today are on. It is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So spanning generations, acknowledgement of the land is a traditional custom of Indigenous peoples when welcoming outsiders onto their land and into their homes. So to build respectful relationships, acknowledging the land is an important part of reconciliation. So it honors the authentic history of North America, its original people, and tells the story of the creation of this country that has historically been missing. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining us today for PLEAC's webinar on achieving digital equity in a post-digital era, meeting the challenge. This is session 2 out of a 2-part series. For those of you who joined us at the beginning of the month, thank you so much. And for those of you just joining us now, we're also very happy to have you. For our second session today, we have a panel of fantastic speakers again. They are Jai Joie, founder, president, and principal at Agentic Digital Media. We have Adam Fraser, publications development coordination and the program support at Legal Aid BC. We have Kate Murray, ADE project lead researcher. We have John Simpson, lawyer and manager of community and publishing services at Legal Aid BC as well. So it's a great lineup today. So more bio details were included in the registration process. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. And before I pass it along to our great speakers today, I just wanted to mention a few housekeeping notes here. So the session is being recorded. Everyone will receive the link to the recording after the webinar is done. Both sessions are being also posted on the website, and that link will be sent around as well. There will also be a very brief survey at the end of the webinar, so please just take a minute out of your day to complete it. This will help us, of course, continue improving our programming. And finally, any questions that you might have today during the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom or the chat function to submit those. The speakers will be answering any questions or any feedback you might have at the end of the webinar today. So either way, feel free to chime in throughout and at the end as well, and we'll address those at the end. So that's sort of my intro. Without further ado, take it away.
Well, I'll just say a few words and then turn it over to the people who actually did the research. We've been aware for some time, of course, that many people face difficulty accessing digital tools and resources. And this has been an issue for quite a long time. And the idea behind this project was to gather some information and be able to report on what the barriers are and what steps can be taken to resolve them. There's some important findings from this, and if we have time at the end, I'll talk about that, but we are short of time, so I won't go into that in any detail. I just want to acknowledge that I'm normally speaking from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people, First Nations in Vancouver, but today I'm actually on the traditional territory of the Wasanich, which the colonizers called Saanich on Vancouver Island. So I just want to acknowledge that. Now I'll pass it over to Kate, who I think is going to be the next speaker.
Thank you, John. We're going to do some teamwork here, as Hannah mentioned. So Jai, if you could advance the slide, that would be great. As John did acknowledge the territories, I'm speaking from the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And we do also want to acknowledge our funders here on this slide. So yeah, we'll move on to the next slide. Jai, could you, oh, thank you. So as John mentioned, this project, and as we mentioned at our last presentation, really emerged from community-based concerns that Legal Aid was hearing about access to digital technology and being able to access digital legal resources. Okay, next slide. So as we did mention in our previous presentation, the ADE project has 4 components. In the November 4th presentation to PLEAC, we focused on the literature review and the quantitative survey of BC residents that was conducted by Centis. And today's presentation is going to present highlights from the project overall, with a focus on the 3rd and 4th components. So these were the user journey interviews with 20 low-income residents from across BC, and those were conducted by Jai Jua of Agentic Digital Media, who you just met. And then the 4th component was surveys, a survey, referrals, tracking, and focus groups with community workers and other intermediaries from across BC. And Adam Fraser and I will speak to that in a little bit. So using these different methods has really enabled us to explore digital equity issues in different ways at sort of very broad and also specific scales. And so sort of jumping to the punchline for today's presentation, the key message from the project is really about the need to provide a range or menu of online and offline options for people. As a note in the final report, our research findings suggest that most BC residents and even most low-income residents can very likely benefit from online legal resources and services. So digital options are really important, but this is not the case for everyone. And so in this project, we've really focused on and foregrounded the experiences of those who face barriers to using digital legal resources, because these are the people who are most at risk of digital exclusion from access to justice. We hope that the study helps to document the digital inequities that many service providers are observing firsthand. And we hope that our reports can help with service planning, but also in communicating this issue to policymakers and funders. In the final report, our research findings are presented in terms of stages in a help-seeking user journey. At the top of the page, you can see we begin with insights about digital divides in what is called BC. We then discuss issues that might arise in searching, locating, and accessing legal help. And lastly, in using and benefiting from digital legal resources. And so we'll follow this format in today's presentation. And then after that, we'll have time for questions and discussion. And so now I will turn things over to Jai so he can talk about the user journey interviews. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. I'm just going to swap over to the other video, the other slide deck. Okay. Let me just start my timer so I can make sure that I'm in the ballpark of timing here. So first, I just want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and just thanking them for looking after the land for so many thousands of years. And also just want to thank Legal Aid BC for inviting me to be part of this project, and also to PLEAC for the opportunity to talk about it, because it's a really interesting project. And basically, for the work that I did in this part of the project, it was really looking at 20 participants and just really getting into a lot of detail with them about a lot of different areas around their behavior and their search pattern. Just in terms of understanding where we were going, we were really asking mainly public legal education information, but we were really looking to ask them more broadly about legal help. An important caveat, though, of course, in the idea of making sure that we can cover at least enough information to make this worthwhile, but we just don't have enough time to get into all of the detail. I really invite you to look at the full report, and I put a link there, the bit.ly/ADE report, and you can find all of the information. So I'll just sort of cover some of the top issues, and then we'll get into some more detail. One of the things around the digital divide issue that we found, and I hope that you can see this, I recognize that the font might be a little slow. Some of this stuff will be fairly clear to some of you, and might be news to others. Obviously, overall, the smartphone is used quite frequently, and in some cases, because not all participants could afford a desktop or laptop. Another insight we found was that many of the folks that we spoke to really preferred texting. It's convenient, allows people to respond at their own time and place. A lot of the messaging apps we also asked about, and they were very popular. There were a few that did prefer phone calls, but by and large, it was texting. And in that idea of what messaging apps were popular, definitely Facebook Messenger stood out very much as you can see here, many describe it as the second go-to. Participants that like that Messenger could be used even outside of cell range as long as they were connected to Wi-Fi. So that was a really kind of clear, interesting idea that, you know, it's almost ubiquitous. And another point that we found was that participants had mixed experiences accessing legal help. Positive experiences often related to friendly step-by-step help. Negative experiences often related to unresponsiveness or communication lapses. And of course, we're understanding that the whole process of being involved in asking for help can be one where they are in a bit of a crisis. They're the people that we spoke to that had experienced significant events that required some kind of assistance in the legal realm were accompanied by a lot of stress and high emotions, as we all can imagine. So sometimes people struggle to reach out, even knowing that the service was available and there for them. Their own mental health issues prevented them from reaching out for help. And this stress obviously meant that people that they spoke to really needed to have that very high level of compassionate response and emotional support. You know, there was one participant that talked quite in detail about the intermediary, the community worker that assisted them in the work that they did in reaching out for help. But the key here was that if there was a negative feeling, you know, or a response from somebody that it really could create a problem with them. You know, a negative response from an intake worker or from a community worker, a frontline intermediary, could really set someone back because of their emotional state. People often associated legal help and Legal Aid BC with representation by a lawyer. That's what they all seem to understand quite easily, but they were less aware of the other services like PLEI. And, you know, it was really interesting to ask and to see the difference. Of course, we would understand that people don't really understand the difference between legal information and legal advice. Not obvious at all. And also, people did have very mixed approaches to legal help seeking. They wanted a variety of different ways, and it starts with digital, but it also could move to the phone and also in person. Many participants were comfortable going online to seek legal help, and some found it faster and more convenient. Again, because we were doing qualitative interviews, I wouldn't want to project that out to a full population, but it was clear that people would turn to the internet, at least in the participants that we interviewed, and look first for the information they were hoping for. And, you know, of course, there were other folks that did describe some of the difficulties navigating legal information online. They would still turn to the internet, but they still had problems navigating. Many participants valued speaking to a person who could provide knowledgeable, immediate, and personalized guidance. This helped clarify confusing or complex legal information. That first hurdle of somebody understanding what the legal landscape was and how they would engage with it, like what were the words, what's the vocabulary, who are the players, that was a very difficult hurdle for people to get over. And so reaching out to somebody in a position of knowledge could really help them articulate for themselves what that landscape looked like and then be able to move forward. And that was because, again, here, some participants specifically preferred to speak to a legal helper in person instead of by phone, text, or video. And that was often with regards to what I was speaking about. And, the other interesting piece is that, sometimes, when you're in a crisis, you just want another human being on the other end. And so talking to somebody on the phone had that additional aspect of providing, that validation that, you're being seen and heard and somebody is responding empathetically to your situation. Now, I have a number of the way that I wanted to do it because of the amount of time. I'm going to just kind of go through a few of these just to show you some of the quotes that people said. And you can see on the screen, the insight, one of the insights that I mentioned along with some of the quotes. And again, in the full report, this is much more, fully laid out. And because I'm going to be wanting to skip to another specific part, I'm just going to, show you two of these that get into a little bit more detail, and you can hopefully in the 10 seconds I'm giving you, you can just take a look at those quotes. What I'm going to do, is kind of skip to some of the implications in this area because I think that's really important. So the implications of those insights that I provided to you are really is that the design and delivery of PLEI needs to seek to meet potential service users where they are. So designing resources with an awareness that the intended audiences may be impacted by stress, trauma, or mental health difficulties. They're unfamiliar with the landscape of legal systems, processes, and terminology, and obviously relevant laws or ministry. And they're unfamiliar with the full range of clear or public legal resources and service that are available. Again, thinking about that difference between representation, information, and advice. And then they have varying degrees of digital technology, access, and comfort. All of this being underneath that umbrella of user-centered design is really important kind of concept to hold overall. So these themes highlight the importance of continuing to develop and promote highly visible points of entry to plea resources and services, which are clearly named and branded, and I'll show you a little bit more about what I mean by that. Accessible, so with low barrier, anti-oppressive frameworks and trauma-informed. We're seeing that being a really important piece of a lot of the work, especially in many different areas now, and also available via multiple channels, online and offline. These are not new necessarily, but it's really important to understand now, especially with the pandemic and the way that people have been interacting with technology. Certainly people have gotten more used to technology, but we're still seeing some gaps. And the effectiveness of these resources is really contingent on what people are trying to do. So having a user-centered design of both the materials and resources, can help legal seekers that are looking for contact information for that offline services. As I mentioned, that phone number. Initial personal guidance from a knowledgeable legal navigator who can help clarify those processes, options, and identify next steps. Human interactions with service providers who are empathetic, non-judgmental, reassuring, and responsive. This trauma-informed approach. Materials that can help them understand the legal landscape and figure out what questions to ask. Those of you that create legal brochures, you'll be pleased to know that a lot of folks, especially in an older, the older demographic of the participants that I interviewed, responded well to the idea of the brochures in the sense that they gave them that landscape that I'm talking about. But the younger folks that I interviewed just didn't even bother to pick them up. So, and then obviously having clearly relevant topic-based information. One of the things that was really interesting that we did get into was thinking about how they were locating and accessing these digital legal resources. So one thing was that, of course, the majority of people were searching on Google. So, Google is still king, but you can see there were some other ones as there, Bing, Yahoo, and DuckDuckGo, but very small compared to Google. So the thoughts that we had were that, making sure that focusing on Google would be a really key part of your strategy. Searching for legal aid was complicated by issues with search engine features. I found this very fascinating, and one of the most interesting aspects was that Google, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, has created a bit of a gray zone, and that gray zone exists between Google and, sorry, I'm just going to check my time here, make sure I'm okay. 10 minutes, good news. Between your site and the user, or the person that's searching for legal information. And so, for example, the way that they map results and associated categories in the Google My Business, and also the different ways in which, for example, legal aid offices appear in search results. And so when you look at your search results, and I'll show you that in a moment, how they appear is very confusing to people in terms of thinking and comparing different services that they might outreach to. So for example, in this diagram, you can see that, this here, Legal Services Society, referred to as general practice attorney, whereas Legal Aid BC in Surrey is referred to as legal services. So this is just a mismatch in terms of the way in which somebody would understand what those services actually are. Are they the same? Well, they are, but they're not aware of that because of the way that Google is categorizing them. There were some additional difficulties with search engines. One of the interesting ones is that people also ask. That's not well understood by the participants that I interviewed, and it doesn't always provide relevant or accurate information. What that basically is a way that you can see other questions that people have asked, and Google will try and attempt to answer them by using search results. People did not understand where this information was coming from. So for example, here's an example of people also ask, and there's that question there. How do you get a marriage certificate in BC? If you click down, then theoretically you would get an answer. Of course, the challenge is that it's not always right. So for example, here, looking for another question on, this is on Bing, not Google, how do you know if you're eligible for legal aid? Well, the jurisdiction is completely wrong. So somebody that would look to the people also ask, thinking that it's a regular question that somebody else might ask, would get a completely incorrect answer according to the law. The other interesting part was that some of the Google business listings included a question and answer feature. And so we looked into this and discovered, somewhat to our horror, that there were definitely questions that people were asking and getting answered, but clearly incorrectly. So here's an example. Those of you that know that, somehow neighbors and fences is a very important issue for a lot of people in British Columbia. You can see here the answer that somebody gave about responding to this, question. That's going to cost you more money than just grabbing a shovel and doing it yourself, lol. So this is like a terrible representation of what the actual legal information is. And then also this idea of like, well, when you see that list on Google, what are you going to click on? What is the first thing that is going to be giving you the information that you need to understand that this is for you? Is it familiar to you? Is it near you? Is it an ad? Does it have positive reviews? So for example, you can see here on this, the information that Google provides about LSS in the NYMO office, all of that kind of information, very, very relevant to somebody that might be searching for it. However, people notice and respond to Google's review features. Reviews in Google really actually had some serious impact to people. And when you look at that, it is quite interesting to see. So for example, what the Google review summary gave and the response to it, for example, this person said, well, 22 reviews is a little low, but not as bad as if it were 3 or 4, which would give them some concern. And then the actual ranking of 3.8, might not be an encouragement for people to reach out, not thinking that it is, an accurate aspect. Searching for help, legal help online also was really interesting to see how people made very, you would call superficial judgments about what and how the site would look in terms of, its credibility. whether it looked good, for example, does it look official, whatever that means to them? Look at the logo. Does the logo seem amateur or professionally designed? Is the website appealing to the eye? These are very superficial aspects that people made. In fact, and even on the other side, where, for example, this participant thought that because the site was quote unquote flashy, they thought it was not a government site. So in this way, I could see you can be damned if you do or don't. And it's a really interesting question about how to reaffirm and reassure people that they are on a site that is accurate, relevant, and important. Good news for those of you that are thinking about that legal mark online. So this implication that I was talking about is this Google gray area. As I talked about, the difference between what people are searching for and the resource on your site that they would want to find. It includes these local maps that people also ask, reviews, and question and answers. And the challenge, of course, is that you have very little direct control over any of these search engine tools. And so incorrect and confusing information can emerge from these, and yet we don't have any ability to control it. Just checking my time here. I've got a couple of minutes. So this is a really important aspect. And one of the important things that I think is that, looking at this My Business area, standardizing around multiple locations and making this strategy part of a style guide for any location or office that is existing. And there are definitely resources available to do that. Also correcting the Google gray area in the Q&As. Doesn't seem to be a way to turn this off. So perhaps answering these questions and actually putting some resource and staff to address them. Again, PLEI organizations are being, the demands are getting more and more, and in this digital space, it's still there as well. Okay. Last area that I wanted to cover was the use and benefit from these digital legal resources. Some website features did stand out as important. Looking for sites that are visually accessible, as I mentioned as well, the professional appearance, so aesthetics and that appear trustworthy. Also, just valuing upfront access to phone-based help was also in that first stage of people's response to a legal crisis or an issue is really helpful. There were also some various factors that resulted in challenges navigating sites. For example, the same page that would appear on desktop could appear very overwhelming on a phone, especially if you're talking about somebody that has low vision and they're actually increasing the font size. I saw one participant, on their mobile phone that had increased the font size so they could read it, and it just made a mess of the page. So understanding the different needs of people and potential ways that people with different abilities are going to approach the site can maybe help, provide some design clarity for them to actually see that site. Obviously, you don't want to overwhelm them. And then again, some of the assumptions through testing, for example, on one of the provincial sites that we examined, there was just a picture of an email icon, and people were, one of the participants mistook that email icon for being able to contact the organization, whereas in fact, that was just email to a friend. Also, website search is definitely a problem. People did not have a lot of trust in that. And we noticed that people, when they use the search on different websites, struggle to find the right information because, of course, it isn't Google, and they have the same expectation that that website will be like Google. And oftentimes the information was not relevant or presented in a way that gave the person some confidence in being able to choose what they would be looking at. Some other things that I wanted to kind of quickly mention, chat. Obviously, some of us are really thinking about how chat can bolster the presence. It was, definitely a kind of twofold answer, I think. A lot of the participants I spoke to thought it was more efficient. They thought it was more convenient. It's later at night. There's not necessarily a human being there. They could get information, especially when you thought about waiting on hold on a phone. And it also was approached as a potential, useful aspect for youth. Chatting was also associated with neutral and non-judgmental interactions and less pressure to respond immediately, which I thought was a really interesting aspect to it in dealing with that crisis situation. There's not as high a level of anxiety in dealing with that. Also, and I apologize that I'm sort of rushing through, but obviously you understand for the time aspects. But the other piece was that people did feel that the chatbot technology is painful. Some of it is insufficiently advanced and thus unhelpful. So I think the challenge is that, people have been sort of burned by poor experiences, poor UX, user experience on chat. And so they're transmitting that poor feeling to the idea that that the chat is all going to be terrible. But the idea that they could escalate to a person was very positive on that idea. So some of the implications that I just want to end off with is, again, we were talking about multiple offline and online channels, making sure that we're going to enhance access to local in-person service locations that are clearly branded and named, and matching that with that online service. And also creating a digital channel strategy that enables people to seek out legal help and communicate in ways that work best for them. So, for example, texting. Facebook Messenger is such an interesting question and a conundrum, really, because of the privacy issues. And yet at the same time, I heard from, I did some other research investigating with intermediaries, and a lot of them are using Messenger to reach out to their clients anyway, regardless of the privacy issues. And then chatbots being quite helpful. So, and then the other thing that I just would kind of point out is that, looking at some kind of more unified system that might help handle requests in a scalable manner might be helpful. And then lastly, of course, I can't leave it off with just continuing to prioritize, the best practices or inspired practice that we know about in web design, accessibility, the user-centered design, designing for ease of navigation, plain language, inclusivity, culturally appropriate, and culturally safe. So we know all of that, and that's just something to kind of remind ourselves, especially if we're using, for example, any unfamiliar legal terminology and acronyms. These could be a better aspect for that. And I think that, just given the time, I think I'm going to end there. I really want to thank you for this, and I apologize again for the quickness that I'm going through all of these things, but I just want to make sure that we get a chance to talk to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jai. And I guess Jai will just bring up our slides now. He's kind of doing tech support for everybody. Thank you. So moving on to the workers' perspectives part of the presentation. That report presents findings from 3 different pieces of research. First, an online survey of community workers and other intermediaries across the province. And second, a range of legal aid staff and community-based partner agencies volunteered to track their referrals across just over 300 inquiries. And third, we had a series of 9 focus groups where community workers shared their perspectives and also received training about one of legal aid's online resources. And Adam really took the lead on that component. And so overall, over 430 workers, advocates, and legal aid staff and partners participated in this component of our study. So thinking about initial steps in seeking legal help online, as a refresher, this slide presents an overall picture of digital divides in BC. And this is an image from the quantitative survey of BC residents that we did discuss in our November 4th presentation to this group. The survey found that in BC, internet use is high in general, but there are significant divides. So you can see here, 44% of those in lower income households and 53% of those in that subset of very low income households face one or more barriers to using the internet. And that's compared with only 18% of those in moderate to high income households. And so many of the people who are assisted by community workers will likely fall into this subset of households with very low income. The next slide, as we noted in our earlier presentation, our study highlights that access is really multidimensional. It depends on many factors. So affordability and urban-rural divides are big issues in BC, for example. This slide shows community workers' observations regarding their clients' device access. And as I mentioned, these insights are important because the people that workers assist are often those who do face the greatest barriers to accessing technology and accessing justice. And so similar to what Jai has just talked about, from workers, we heard that many of the lowest income BC residents experience constrained forms of access, things like only having older devices, using pay-as-you-go plans, or relying on free Wi-Fi. And we also heard from workers about the increased impacts of intimate partner violence during the pandemic. And so this is actually what Jai had mentioned. The most noticeable pattern is that many of these workers' clients access internet primarily by phone. So if you focus on the green sections of the bar chart here, just over half of workers indicated that most of their clients only had a mobile phone, but no computer. And we also heard that many legal tasks are difficult to undertake when you only have a phone. Workers' comments also emphasized how community access, for instance, at libraries, is really vital for some people, but it does have limitations. So for instance, there are inadequate access locations in some communities. There's time limits on computer use, a lack of privacy, often an inability to save documents, and obviously closures of a lot of these spaces during COVID. And so just thinking really broadly about implications here, when it comes to digital divides, there's obviously a need, as I mentioned it earlier in November, for broader public policy interventions relating to technology infrastructure and affordability. But we did hear that public legal sector organizations can play a role through service locations that do enable supported access to technology. So Legal Aid BC's PLC network spaces, as well as the RISE Women's Legal Clinic, are good examples of these kinds of interventions. Other digital divides relate to skill, comfort, and experience with technology, and these issues came up often with workers. As Mary and Alana did note in our November 4th presentation, the project's quantitative survey of BC residents found that 23% of those in lower income households reported skill-related barriers to using the internet, compared with only 5% of those in moderate to high income households. And so as these numbers indicate, barriers related to digital skill and comfort are really rooted in structural factors and opportunities. And so as this workers quote suggests, things like access factors, so things like having technology and internet access at home, as well as educational and workplace opportunities to learn and use technology are really key. Workers often describe that their clients, as Jai mentioned, were most comfortable using familiar platforms, so especially Facebook and Facebook Messenger. But this didn't necessarily mean that they would have sufficient access and knowledge or experience to navigate digital legal resources. And so again, a second really high level implication is that the design of PLEI and legal services needs to account for this variety of levels of technology access and comfort. And moving on from thinking only about digital divides, it's also really important, as you'll all know, to think about legals that are, or issues that come to play in legal help seeking, and how these can play a role at the stage of locating and accessing legal help online. And so some of these issues are listed on the right side of the diagram here. And you might recall that our project's quantitative survey found that most BC residents are receptive to the idea of seeking out legal information or help online, but comfort, confidence, and ability to go online for legal help does vary by legal issue, and also according to dynamics of advantage and disadvantage. And so overall, we found it's important to consider how these combined digital equity and access to justice issues can create sort of a double set of both digital and legal barriers for people, sometimes before people seek help, during online searches, as Jai has detailed, and also while using digital legal resources. And Adam will speak a little more to this later. This chart is from our survey of community workers again. In addition to access-related barriers, the most impactful barriers that were observed by community workers were about the complexity and inaccessibility of legal processes and legal language. So things like technical terms and processes, and people's unfamiliarity with what services were available to them. Stress, trauma, and overwhelm were really commonly mentioned, as well as difficulties navigating digital technology. And so on this chart, you can see that between about 1/2 and 3/4 of workers indicated that most of their clients were impacted by at least one of these top 3 issues. And as Jai mentioned, we did hear about many of these same themes in user interviews. And I'll let Adam speak to this slide.
Sorry, I was on mute. In addition to the online searches, as discussed, community workers and other intermediaries are key in assisting people to locate and access digital resources. When we asked workers and LABC staff and partners about their referrals, in most cases where people weren't referred to digital legal resources, this was because the client's issue or circumstances required other types of assistance, like duty counsel or legal representation or one-to-one help. However, with workers' busy schedules, high rates of turnover among client-facing staff, and frequent changes in the legal landscape, community workers face challenges in staying up to date with what public legal sector resources and services are available in BC. So as the image on the slide shows, almost 4 in 10 workers surveyed said they would not know or were not sure what digital legal resources were available. To speak further to that, workers in our focus groups expressed how important training sessions were, not only to raise awareness among workers, but that they weren't likely to recommend a resource that they weren't very familiar with, so they could answer questions or assist their clients in using them. They also really expressed that it helps to have orientation materials available with the resources so that when they're handing them off to clients, they know that the clients have support if they don't have time to do that themselves. You can move on to the next slide. This is Kate.
Sorry, I was stuck on mute as well there. So as in the first quote on this slide, the unfamiliar nature of legal systems can make it really difficult for people to locate and understand the legal information or help online. Also commonly occurring stress, trauma, and emotional or mental health issues, as well as experiences of systemic discrimination, can create significant barriers for some people. And so the second quote here really speaks to that issue. As Jai has already discussed, as you'll notice, there's a lot of synergy between the various components of our research. A key message from the project really does relate to the value of human help in locating and accessing resources. So access to knowledgeable, immediate, and personalized guidance at this stage. And this was valued for clarifying complex legal information, but also for emotional support. And so again, thinking broadly about implications, these themes emphasize the importance, as Jai has mentioned, about really thinking about points of entry for PLEI resources and services, and thinking about how these can be really highly visible, safe, and trauma-informed. Alongside other efforts, this will also include continued outreach and support to intermediaries, as well as community-based planning and service coordination. And I know Legal Aid has been working on that with service providers across BC. And I'll throw it back to Adam here.
So we get to the final stage of help seeking. Even when people can locate and access suitable digital legal resources, some barriers can prevent them from using or benefiting from the resources. This quote above is from a community worker who participated in our focus groups. This type of comment was common. It illustrates interplay of barriers related to digital comfort and skill, literacy, overwhelm, and the stress that is inherent aspect of legal issues, and how one-to-one assistance helps clients to access digital tools. Many workers have clients with difficulty reading English, or using computers. Some are completely unfamiliar with digital environments. These clients were often so afraid of doing things wrong that they wouldn't even start with a process. Others would seek help from workers after trying on their own and giving up. Sometimes they would get all the way through and they would just get to the final submit button and be too anxious to press the button, worried that they did something wrong. It's also common for workers to have clients who in everyday situations have moderate or high digital competency, but due to their situation, overwhelm, and the fear of doing things wrong, that prevented them from benefiting from the resources without help. Sometimes they were even just too overwhelmed to just look at a computer screen. And as we mentioned before, that most people use the phone. Just to switch to having to use a desktop computer often added a lot of stress. In these cases, a lot of workers provide emotional and technical support. They read aloud for clients, they talk through forums with clients to help build things out, and they reassure the clients that they're doing things correctly, and they help them find more resources. So we discussed quite a bit as well about design components that can mitigate these stresses, that can help users, get to the end on their own, or these same sort of design things can help people who help people, because the easier it is for everyone, the easier it is for everyone. So when you're going through this sort of online tunnel where you're clicking next, we call that progressive disclosure, where you're only giving as much information as the person needs at a time. That helps to dole out small amounts of information at a time, so they're not looking at huge walls of text. But one of the problems with that we heard from workers is that the further they go through a process, the more times they press next, the more anxious they become. So one of the things that you can do to mitigate that is a design process or a design tool just called breadcrumbs, where it just shows you where you are in the process, so they know, you're halfway through, or you can go back, because they often feel like they can't go back. And other times, just allowing people to save so that they can do the process over a few days on their own time, so they can meter their stress for themselves. Other supportive things are for people who have difficulty reading English is text-to-speech options. And one of our most requested things from users in the interview was support in languages other than English. Can we go to the next slide, please? So another important thing to note, yes. So this is, I'm actually going to read this one out loud. So when we were working with clients, we're working with clients, they're not only asking us how to use the tool, they're asking us to define, explain, interpret. We don't have that knowledge. We're not lawyers. This comes back to hit us. Do we have to run around and find more resources to answer the question? Do we have the resources in town? So not all community workers are legal advocates, and they often are faced with helping people with legal problems. So it's important to have as much information all in one place as possible. I will also say that of the workers surveyed, almost 8 in 10 ranked similar in short language as very important in helping clients from digital legal resources. In focus groups, workers said how important plain language is for conveying legal information to their clients. Less ambiguity and complexity means less explaining. And if you're translating to languages other than English, legal jargon can be particularly difficult. In fact, our most common content request, as I mentioned earlier, in focus groups, was to provide resources in languages other than English. They also mentioned how helpful it is to have the integrated definitions as we use on the family law website, because they often run into terms or legal information they don't know. And it was really important for the users to be able to convey that information to their clients, but also to have all other resources listed. That is.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Sorry. Too many buttons. So a key theme across all the components of the study really relates to the importance of knowledgeable, trauma-informed one-to-one help. And so as Adam has just described, surveys and focus group comments illustrate how intermediaries really provide an impressive array of really sensitive and personalized help with navigating legal information, navigating technology, often language and literacy support, as well as emotional support. And when we asked about supports and interventions, when we asked workers, one-to-one navigation assistance from someone with legal knowledge was ranked as the most valuable type of support. And this was followed closely by affordable technology access. In this chart, you can see that twice as many workers said that their clients could access and use digital legal resources with help, compared with the number who said that their clients could use these resources independently. And so again, this was a common theme across all components. And you might, as Jai mentioned about the user interviews, and you might recall that in the quantitative survey that Alana and Mary discussed in early November, across all income groups, the majority agreed that even if they searched for legal help online, they would still want help from a person or advisor. And this was the case of 80% of those in lower income households. So we'll close with this quote from a community worker. And this worker is just really emphasizing how some people will need in-person supports. And they stress the value of the kind of emotional support that can be provided in person versus by phone or digitally. We also heard from workers that COVID had really demonstrated for them the importance of things like extended hours and drop-in formats for in-person services, and that these were especially key for some clients and often those who were the most at risk or systemically marginalized. And so overall, as again, we've mentioned, the findings for this study really highlight the need for accessible multi-channel approaches. And so this means using digital design practices that mitigate those barriers. And both Jai and Adam have just discussed this, designing for stressed audiences, among other things, but also providing complementary and alternative forms of help for people who are unable to access or use digital legal resources independently. So these multiple channels could include anything from a real spectrum of sometimes only very brief to more intensive kinds of help through phone, through messaging, through chat-based assistance, with digital tools, but also in-person help will continue to be really crucial for some people. And so this slide shows our project website where the final report and all the detailed component reports are available. And we really encourage you to check those out. John may just want to make a couple brief comments on next steps, and then we have a few minutes for comments and questions. And so thank you very much, everybody, for your attention and for bearing with us through some of the technical issues at the beginning.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone for participating in the panel. I think this is great. It's really good to have the people who did the research actually reporting on what they accomplished. And I really want to congratulate everybody on that. Legal ABC, like all of us involved in the PLEI world, are aware of these issues. And we've all taken steps to try to address the barriers that have been identified today, but there's a lot more work to be done. And one of the things that we'll be doing is taking a very close look at the reports and prioritizing the recommendations, and then deciding what we'll do next in each of these areas, whether it's improving digital accessibility or providing more assistance one-on-one. That what we can do to improve the situation for that group who are continuing to be excluded. And I want to come back to something I said at the beginning just before I finish, which is that we do know that many people who are low income marginalized can and do use digital resources, can and do have access to the internet. It's this persistent group which does not. They're significant. They're a significant component of our audiences, and we really need to pay attention to that when we're designing digital resources. How are those people going to use them? And I think that's a question I would leave everyone with today.
Thank you very much, John. I'm just gonna chime in, and we're just made it in time here, and I noticed there's a lot of questions in the Q&A portion here, which is really nice to see. And thank you to our panelists for trying to answer as many as they can as we're running out of time today. So if you did sort of ask a question there, please do check it out. I see Adam and Jai have sort of addressed some of those questions there with some really helpful information. I do want to. Oh, I thought there was an open one as well, but I guess from oh, perfect, Jai, you're on it. You've answered it from Drew here, which is fantastic. So thank you very much for that. So if you did ask something, please go ahead and take a look. Thank you, Joel, for your really kind comment as well. I really appreciate that. I was going to sort of ask another question here that I received as well, was just with regards to age difference. I think this one might be for Jai. So was there an age difference in internet preferences? You mentioned Google reviews, ratings, web appearance, and so on. Were any of these search preferences age specific?
I mean, yeah, and again, just in terms of some important caveat, again, this was qualitative. So again, it's really difficult to project out into a larger sense of the audience. I mean, I think that the things that we know and what I observe certainly in the participants is that, you know, older folks tended to have less comfort with technology. Younger folks tended to have more, but that really didn't, you know, address some of the more common aspects like the unfamiliarity with the legal technology or terminology, and the inability, for example, to you know, use certain kinds of technology. So I think that on the whole, if you were trying to kind of like think about it from your perspective and the PLEI world, one important caveat I would make would be that idea that the older folks seem to be more attracted to the use of brochures, whereas the younger folks absolutely did not even pick it up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And I see just Patricia asked about the previous presentation. I see, Kate, you're going ahead and answering that one. I don't know if you wanted to just type it in or if you wanted to answer that one live. Whatever's easier, not going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's actually probably easy for me to just talk it out. I think I'll probably have to really refer Patricia to the detailed census survey report for that. That was sort of a representative quantitative survey of BC residents. So we really tried to do a population survey. So all of the detail about those participants and but they did sort of after they received the results, I know they did sort of mathematically weight it to the age of BC residents. But again, I'm not really a quantitative data scientist. So I'll just refer you to that report where they do lay out their methodology and that sampling methodology. So hopefully that helps.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for your very valuable answers for the questions that we received today. You know, thank you for sort of the nice comments here. I do want to sort of finish off by just saying thank you very much to Jai, Kate, Adam, John, our fantastic panelists today. Thank you for a really informative presentation. Thanks to everyone who was able to join us today for session 2, or if you've joined both sessions or you've joined us earlier this month, thank you very much. I see Jai, thank you for posting that in the chat, the link there. So as mentioned before, the link to the webinar recording will be made available to everyone. If you're interested in connecting again with any of our speakers, please feel free to send me an email, or if you sort of have the contacts here from our registration page, please feel free to do so if we didn't get to your question or if anything else comes to mind. So this is our last webinar for PLEAC for 2021, how time flies. I do want to thank our panelists again. We'll see everyone again in the new year, but for now, have a lovely rest of your week, and everybody please stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.